Hey everyone! Today we're diving into our third podcast, and we're continuing to answer your questions. And before we continue, I would like to say, first of all, to thank our audience, our guys who took on the task of systematizing all these questions, in particular Alexandra A. A huge thank you to him, and really to everyone on our forum who takes an active stance, asks Igor questions, and offers a ton of great ideas that we try to implement as best as we can. So today, we're continuing to answer your questions, and we'll do our best to cover all of them that you've asked, and we'll see how it goes from there. Igor, welcome. Well, today we continue to answer your questions. We will try to go through all of them that you asked, and then we will see how it goes.
Hey everyone, once again. I'll say a few words about this studio. Our previous choice was justified by the fact that we wanted to do everything in nature so that everything would be beautiful, a little mystical, spiritual, and so on. And this is actually one of the interesting questions that we might explore later on, but just briefly. Many people have this idea in their heads that if we talk about spiritual things, then it must necessarily be somewhere in nature, in the mountains and caves. And people often contrast spirit and spirituality with the urban and digital, which is fundamentally wrong. But we'll talk about that later. First, let's move on to answering these wonderful questions. We're trying to answer as many of the questions you asked in this episode as possible, because in the last episode, we only managed to answer about 4 right.
Well, 4, but they were pretty extensive. We had follow-up questions and topics in each one, and I think people were okay with that. Let's also highlight another point. What's up with your appearance?
Get used to it. We can change our look. We're independent, with no history tying us down. If you resist or dislike this change, being used to the old podcast, it shows inflexibility. And at the same time, if you have some internal resistance, you don't like something in what you see now, you're already used to the previous versions of podcasts. That just shows you don't have any fluidity. A warrior must be fluid, remember that. You have to take everything with a smile, easily, and with as little sense of self-importance as possible. That's actually the main rule for shifting your point of assembly.
Listen, I thought you were just going to say that you're getting ready for Christmas and throw on a beard.
Nah, I'm gonna troll a bit with stories like that so you don't get too used to it.
Alright, let's go. So, the first question comes from Quentin Tarantino, and he asked you to share your experience and maybe suggest some practices for shifting the point of assembly to different positions.
Yes, there are several ways to shift the point of assembly, ranging from healthy to unhealthy. The coolest, most powerful way to shift your point of assembly is through the practice of lucid dreaming. It's a direct tool for managing the point of assembly. If someone doesn't practice dreaming, they're not a magician. They can claim anything, wear amulets, but for me, that's a no, you're not a magician. Even in Castaneda's group, like Don Juan and others, they have specializations. Some are stalkers, some are dreamers, but they all dream. It's like life. Even if we take Castaneda's party, there is Don Juan, Julian, Naguali, and so on. Yes, they have a specialization. Someone is a stalker, someone is a dreamer, but they all dream. It's just like in life. You can specialize in anything, but you should at least know how to make yourself a simple fried egg. Otherwise, in certain situations, you'll just disappear, right? It doesn't always depend on the restaurants. So, anyone who practices the spiritual path must be able to shift their point of assembly. The coolest and most powerful way is dreaming. The second powerful method, which is also quite complex, is the practice of recapitulation. Because what does the practice of recapitulation actually do? It makes you shift your point of assembly to the position it was in when you experienced that particular moment in your life. Just try to reminisce a bit. Nostalgia is exactly that. It's a shift in the point of assembly. Why is it that when people feel nostalgia, they notice it so rarely, or rather, so vividly? Because at the moment of the shift of the assemblage point, not only your memory changes, but also the self-perception of the body. And this contrast between the sensations of the body now and then, it just becomes super obvious, and we call it nostalgia. When you shift the assemblage point even more powerfully, the contrast there is so obvious that you don't just have, some strange feelings. You even begin to experience new feelings that you have never experienced before. And that's why it can scare you, amaze you, or anything in between. So, recapitulation is the second solid, awesome way to shift your point of assembly. There's another way to shift your points of assembly that stalkers practice through unusual actions. Well, you start doing everything with your left hand instead of your right, or your right instead of your left if you're right-handed, or left-handed. So, this method is less effective, but it's more understandable and it's ritualistic. That is, there are understandable rituals that you can do. For example, many have probably seen rituals of various Indian tribes, where the shaman begins to dance like this, mutter something, and so on, and do a bunch of unusual actions that an ordinary person wouldn't do. If you just goof around like that for 30 minutes, completely letting go of your sense of self-importance and allowing yourself to do absolutely ridiculous things that come to mind, your point of assembly will definitely shift, no doubt about it, and that can even be a bit scary. Most people, though, aren't able to do this the first time because they feel shy, thinking, oh, what if someone sees me, and so on, and it can even be scary. Most people, however, are not able to do this the first time because they are shy, they think, oh, what if someone sees me, and so on. So, if you're planning to practice this, find a place where no one can hear or see you, where you know for sure that no one will catch you off guard, and then you might be able to relax for 30 minutes, doing absolutely ridiculous stuff. It just has to. The wilder the movements you make, the crazier the actions you take, the better the results. Unstable. The wilder the movements you make, the crazier the actions you take, the better the results. But unfortunately, from my perspective, this is such an uncontrollable and unstable way to shift your point of assembly that, in practice, it's just a cool special effect, nothing more. It's really hard to use this method effectively.
I wanted to ask you about more standard methods. Maybe, well, first of all, the power walk. It still leads to a shift in the point of assembly and not just to stopping the inner dialogue itself. Especially the prolonged one. I've personally experienced it on my journey, and it's definitely an unusual feeling for the body and for the whole being when it's done right. And then there's breathing. All the pranayamas that exist in yoga and so on, they also lead, at the very least, to stopping or slowing down the inner dialogue, which is actually connected to some kind of movement. I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe there's no movement at all.
There are indeed those moments that you mentioned. If we talk about the power walk, it all relates to what I just mentioned, unusual actions for you. Because the power walk itself doesn't have any magical attributes. In simple terms, if you make it habitual, and if it becomes something ordinary for you, nothing will shift for you in any direction. The effect you get is precisely because you're forced to move in an unusual way, which is why it's called the power walk. Roughly speaking, if you make it habitual, and if it becomes something ordinary for you, nothing will shift in any direction for you. So, the effect you get is precisely because you're forced to move in an unusual way, which is why it's called the power walk. So, I used to run in the power walk while hiking in the Altai Mountains. And not just in Altai, but also in Abakan and nearby areas connected to those places. As a result, I reached a state where you completely give control to your body, and you're amazed at how you end up in the right places. So, when you're running in the mountains, if you're running down a mountain really fast, the moment any thoughts start to creep in, you can fall right away. Yeah, it's really scary right away. The speed is just too much. I remember running over the stones, with gaps of about 1 or 2 meters between them. And it was a whole field of such debris, huge waves, which were as tall as a person or even bigger. And you're running on the very tops of them. And it's only possible to do this when you've completely switched off and are actually in the power walk. So, you're being pulled right there. A more classic power walk is when you lift your knees high, almost to your chest, and take those big steps forward. It also exists, and it can shift your point of assembly. But again, it's about practical application, right? If this whole thing allows you to really relax, to completely give control to your spirit and body, which work together and start moving you in the dark. Alright then, if you have thoughts running through your head at that moment, then, of course, nothing will work. It's less about actions, and more about bringing yourself into a certain state of consciousness. Next, breathing techniques are unhealthy. When you hyperventilate, your body enters an unusual mode. This is unfamiliar to you. When you, for example, start hyperventilating, your body begins to enter an unusual mode, This is also an action and a state that are unfamiliar to you. In this state, slightly shifting your point of assembly, you can experience a cool special effect, and that's it. It's also basically an action and a state that are unfamiliar to you. In this state, by slightly shifting from the assemblage point, you can feel a cool special effect, and that's all. So, basically, you won't get anything special out of it, except for the situation when you start to have severe oxygen starvation or, on the contrary, mild hyperventilation when there is too much oxygen. In this case, you can get stability in 2 assemblage points and feel effects similar to the effects of all sorts of hallucinogens, right? Like cacti, mushrooms, and stuff. But by and large, this is such a small effect that it doesn't compare to the power plants. Which, by the way, I don't particularly recommend consuming because they are very destructive to the body. And they can give you a lot of what I call side awareness that isn't even real. However, I will say about myself that yes, I tried and so on, but Shamana, for example, has never tried it and still had all the necessary attributes needed to shift the point of assembly. So, if we take Castaneda himself, in the first 2 books, he describes how he was indulging in a whole bunch of psychedelics, and then he writes that it was all because he was being foolish. And there's some truth to that. If a person really feels like their thinking is too rigid, then these psychedelics can help to loosen things up a bit. And there's some truth to that. If a person really feels like their thinking is too rigid, then these psychedelics can help to loosen things up a bit. It's like a fast track to doing the splits. But it's always painful and not always safe. So, basically, only do this under the supervision of professionals. Don't try it at home. Although most people don't listen to this and, of course, try it at home, then consider themselves warrior mages, that's definitely a thing. Generally speaking, people tend to split into 2 camps, and I actually read about this recently. Some just start binging on a bunch of drugs and think of themselves as warrior mages, while they're really just addicts. The second group follows the path of war. They learn focusing shifts the assembly point. Castaneda says turning off inner dialogue is key. And at some point, they realize that there is nothing better than the practice of focusing to shift the point of assembly. Naturally, the most central way to shift the point of assembly, as Castaneda himself mentions, is to turn off the inner dialogue. Or, more precisely, you could call it the inner conversation. Basically, it's the dialogue. Because dialogue is when you talk to someone that's completely schizo. Usually, people just have this internal monologue or conversation, in a different way. If you've managed to stop the inner dialogue, inner conversation, or inner monologue for a decent amount of time using any practice, then your point of assembly starts to shift pretty quickly. The first time I encountered the shift in the point of assembly, I was really scared by it. One of the most effective ways to turn off the inner conversation is to place a bright, glowing object in the dark. Just a bright red point, like a small LED light, for example, or a little candle that glows. It allows you to turn off the saccades, those are the quick eye movements. If they're fixed for you, then your inner conversation automatically starts to shut off. And at that moment, most people immediately feel the shift in their point of assembly. And you usually feel it like you're sinking through the floor, moving sideways, or going up. That is, you have such serious feelings in your spatial position. That's a clear sign that your point of assembly has shifted.
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but it seems to me that it might not be for everyone, or the degree of it will just vary, because a person can have such a powerful tonal that the inner dialogue just can't be broken through like that. He'll keep repeating things to himself, and so on. So, if he doesn't have the intention to turn off the inner dialogue from the start, then any tricks will be hard for him, including focusing on points, or really anything else. He'll just keep repeating things to himself, and so on. So, if he doesn't have the intention to turn off the inner dialogue from the start, then any tricks will be hard for him, including focusing on points, or really anything else. So, there has to be intention. And well, you see, this is all ready for you now, because you have both practice and experience, plus the intention, right. And for a person who comes in from scratch, for example, starting out, they still need to get into the groove. What I want to point out is that the shift in the point of assembly isn't the goal. It's a consequence of moving along the path, and it will come at some point, probably, if you follow the path. Again, all the disciplines, stopping the inner dialogue, working with dreams, and so on. This is a consequence of moving along the path. And it will come someday, probably, if you follow the path. Again, all the disciplines, stopping the internal dialogue, working with dreams, and so on. It will gradually come. But to set a goal just to shift it, solely for the sake of shifting it, I suspect that's probably a really problematic approach and quite difficult in itself.
Well, it's just as abstract as money. Most people don't need money, they need specific experiences. I want the experience of driving a car, and so on. But in reality, money is just a mediator. and the ancient seers actually referred to the shift in the point of assembly like that. They viewed it as a marker with ranks based on where the assembly point shifted. It's a sign to observe the world from a different perspective. There's no point in shifting the assembly point on purpose, but be aware of new areas of attention where your perception lands, especially when the assembly point shifts. Naturally, there is no point in trying to shift the point of assembly on purpose, but it makes sense to be aware of those new, so to speak, areas of second attention where your awareness and perception land. It's right at the moment when the point of assembly itself shifts. That's why I say the coolest, most powerful, clear, straightforward, and practical way for me is dreaming. So, you won't be able to directly enter a dream, while that inner chatter is paralyzing you, right? You still need a certain level of relaxation and the ability to turn off that inner chatter, as well as the skill to build that intention and recognize the moment of falling asleep. But we'll talk about that later. I also want to remind everyone about the purpose of this podcast. Yara is actually the person who is working on the project and who is making all these films now and preparing this whole story with the filming of the series based on the books of Carlos Castaneda. I'm the person who's basically his guest. And my goal was to suggest this format to help him speed up his filmmaking activities. That is, for those who think that I came here to earn money or develop games there and so on, no. I'm not interested in any of this at all. That's why you don't know my name or anything. But the only thing I urge you to do is, if you have the means and the desire to help speed up the filming of what Yara is working on, the new series of the film, just check the link in the description or in the description of this video for the details on where you can send donations to help everything move along faster. There you go. One more time. In my entire life, I've never made a dime from talking to people about spiritual practices or doing card readings, not even once. Honestly, that's just a turn off for me. Maybe I'll talk about it someday. But I really wanted to help the person get things moving faster. I help not just with words, but also with actions. I've made some financial contributions too, but the real power can only come from you guys, because we need a lot of people to support this, not just one person.
Yeah, thanks. But you see, our podcasts have grown into something separate. That's why we actually created a separate group and everything else, because it's really important. And I totally get that people might come not just to find out the news and what's happening with the films, but also just for the podcasts. That's totally fine too. And I totally realize that people might come not just to find out the news and what's happening with the films, but also just for the podcasts. That's totally fine. But, of course, the help that Igor talked about is really important, and the more there is, the faster the process will go. It's extremely logical, and unfortunately, that's just how life is. Without money, without the intention of an equivalent, the intention of money, well, it just doesn't work out, unfortunately. The next question we have is from Phoenix G-Tag. The first one, he has a whole list. The first question was about the loss of human form. Again, we're addressing all of this to you, to your experience and your ideas and suggestions. How is that supposed to work?
So, if we take it from the perspective of a Pakistani, the loss of human form is about losing the thought patterns that prevent you from freely experiencing this world, right? So, on the level of vision, it's the outer shell of the cocoon falls away, and you start to shine with a brighter light. You get a more direct perception, from the perspective of how this feels in practice and what it's really for. The outer shell of the cocoon falls away, and you start to shine with a brighter light. You get a more direct perception, from the perspective of how this feels in practice and what it's really for. It's primarily about gaining what's called fluidity, from the perspective of how this feels in practice and what it's really for. This is primarily needed to gain what's called fluidity. A person, in a way, is like a kind of shell. If these are actually all abstractions, then these are examples, metaphors. But if we assume there's an egg, and it has a shell on the outside that makes it hard. Because of that, there are limitations. You have a fixed mindset. You've lost neuroplasticity and can't perceive new categories. So, you have this rigid kind of mind. Otherwise, you lose neuroplasticity, you cannot perceive new categories, and so on. By losing your human form, you gain that very fluidity that is necessary and can ultimately shift the assemblage point more effectively. For example, if you take a book by Castaneda, where he went to a house where those witches attacked him, so to speak, there was a moment when he talked about Lagarata, saying that she lost her human form, which is why she can hang out with everyone easily, and she no longer has a sense of her own importance, right? So, from this, we can directly conclude that when a person loses their sense of self-importance, they also lose their human form at that moment. There was a moment when they talked about Lagarata, saying that she lost her human form, which is why she can hang out with everyone easily, and she no longer has a sense of her own importance, right? Therefore, from here we can draw a direct conclusion that when a person loses his sense of self-importance, he also loses his human form at that moment. It's something to strive for. I haven't gone through that stage yet, but my shaman, who told me he shed his human form, said it's quite painful. In that moment, you start to feel like your body is really sick. Although I've had a few breakdowns, with the mirror of self-reflection. You just completely lose the meaning of everything you are, everything around you, and what you understand. And then you reassemble yourself and think, wow, everything I knew before was complete nonsense. There you go. This is very close to what losing the human form is, because it's one of the stages a person goes through. I can't add anything more to that. I think striving to shed the human form is just as unproductive as trying to shift your point of assembly. So, it happens naturally through practice. So, the more you get rid of your ego, the more you practice the warrior's path, the more fluid you are, the freer your perception is, and the less fanatical you are, accepting or rejecting things, the higher the chance that you'll lose your human form. And, apparently, this is directly connected to the flyers, right, who feed on us. So, they are basically the reason for your human form at all. In other words, they create this whole unshakable picture of the world for you, trying with all their might to hold onto it so you don't break free. As soon as you shed your human form, the flyer automatically flies away from you, and that's it. And at that moment, you have no emotional experiences regarding your own fate. You become more accepting and humble.
Well, in this case, you see, we also need to discuss the concept of the flyers sometime, because the idea itself came from the later books of Castaneda. It wasn't there in the early, orthodox ones, let's call them that. But there was also the theme of controlled stupidity. She wasn't there in the early, orthodox ones, let's call them that. But there was also the theme of controlled stupidity. Well, controlled stupidity isn't connected to losing the human form.
Yeah, it's interconnected, of course. That's the only thing you have left when you've lost your form. Because right now, people are just doing foolishness for the most part. So, those who aren't familiar with this concept, they're pretty much about to die soon. There's this guy Ivan Yusevich, and he has a whole bit about death. He's a comedian, yeah, that stand-up guy. He says some really funny things there. He says, "Are you all aware that everyone sitting here is going to die in 40 years? Like, why the hell do I need this smart speaker? If I'm going to die soon, why aren't we all focusing on that right now?" It's really funny. And everyone laughed, right? Everyone just laughed, right? And he's like, "Why do I need this smart speaker? What am I supposed to say to it? Alice, I'm dying. Help me at the end." There you go. And the situation turns out to be such that if you don't understand all this, then you do everything with a very serious expression on your face. You start nitpicking at everyone, trying to prove your truth, and all that, right? So, you live in this world where everything is super serious. As soon as you shed your human form, you instantly realize, first of all, your mortality. It becomes very obvious, really fast. Secondly, you realize that you no longer have any meaning or attachment to what's happening around you. Everything becomes completely ridiculous to you. The only way to exist in all of this is to pretend that you're serious. To pretend. Use control stupidity. So it's a tool to keep you from getting caught, basically. Because to people, you'll just seem crazy. If you walk up to someone on the street and say, "Come on, don't worry, you're going to die anyway," they're going to think you're a psycho who's messing with their life, right? It's like, I don't know, if you take a play, and all the actors know perfectly well who they are, that they're all actors, but at one moment, one of them can't take it anymore. when they see someone else shouting the lass, poor Yorick, and getting all emotional about someone dying, they run onto the stage and shout, "Guys, don't worry, it's all just a performance, everything's fine." At that moment, what do the others do? They try to brush it off from the stage, like, "What are you doing messing up our whole story, right?" So, the same thing will happen to you if you realize that you're finally a superhuman and start moving forward. You'll start nitpicking at everyone, telling them that they urgently need to change, right? Because they're all blowing eggs.
Listen, I gotta tell you, a lot of people probably pretending to be someone they're not, especially those who have already crossed that line. They'll be telling others, you know. It's the same kind of nurturing of ego, first and foremost. And I think it's so characteristic of humans to tell stories and be someone they're not. It fits perfectly here. And I think 99% of people act exactly that way. They'll talk about how important it is to let go of your sense of self-importance, to live in the moment, but those are just words, and there's no real action behind them. And over time, you start to see that almost all the people, basically, who claim to be that way, really are. So, it's emptiness. It's just words.
Well, mostly, yeah. And naturally, if you're doing this in relation to your own identity, that's the only criterion under which your numbers will grow, right? Then all the motivation is clear. That's why Castaneda suggests getting rid of your personal history, because even right now, I can be the person I'm talking about, or I might not be, and I really don't care. I really don't care, because even if I mess up, so what? Nobody knows me. I really don't care, because even if I mess up, so what? Nobody knows me. Or on the flip side, if I become great, so what? Nobody knows me. Or on the flip side, if I become great, so what? Nobody knows me. I won't be able to take advantage of those fruits. Someone might take advantage of that later, come out with a similar voice and say, "That was me," and so on. Well, great. Let him take on that role. I'm not interested in that.
Guys, so I know that you voted on these questions. Like, for example, there are a ton of them on the list from Phoenix, Chicago. But if we go in order and tackle all these questions, this podcast will probably end right here, because we can't answer very concisely. Igor tends to give pretty detailed responses. That's good in this case. So we decided that we'll answer one question at a time, and then we'll see how it goes. If we have enough extra questions from each of you, we can come back to them later. Well, or maybe for the next podcast, so sorry about that, otherwise we won't have time.
Well, we'll try. Let me see if I can shorten my wordiness.
I don't think it's worth it. Thank goodness for the rambling. A lot of interesting things come up later. And you remember how there were already such battles over the tarot cards after you just brought that up.
By the way, I have a comment on this topic about the tarot cards. That's funny. The thing is, the person who worries the most about tarot cards basically forgets that it's a kind of fanaticism. In other words, he's breaking the original principle where a warrior accepts or rejects, discards or keeps. And if he's taken such a firm stance that for him, tarot cards are definitely a no-go, then from that perspective, he's a fanatic. So, roughly speaking, he's breaking the original principle, where a warrior accepts or rejects, discards or keeps. And if he's taken such a firm stance that for him, tarot cards are definitely a no-go, then from that perspective, he's a fanatic. Right away. So he's really being a fanatic about the fact that he thinks it shouldn't be this way, and it shouldn't work like that. I'll add that I've never read tarot cards for anyone for any amount of money. I just used it as an example of how it can work. You can roll the dice, you can read coffee grounds, or you can say, "I'm going to step outside, and the first person who says a word will answer my inner question." Or I'll turn on the TV. It really doesn't matter what symbols you're using.
The personal power that lies within a person will be important.
Yes. The inner self has a good connection with the spirit, and that's what personal power is. The better your connection with the spirit, the more personal power you have. That's the first one. The second thing is to agree with him on which system of symbols he will use to convey information to you, especially if for some reason you're in a mode where you can't rely on silent knowledge, so the spirit isn't answering you directly from within. That's the most normal way for you. So, if your mind is noisy for some reason and you can't calm it down, you need to understand the answer. You can use this cheap method with a certain level of accuracy. Yeah, I get very precise answers. I usually do it this way. At the same time, I never lay out any solitaire or anything like that with these tarot cards. At the same time, I can use anything. I can read on a napkin. Right. I really don't care. So it's a quick way to get information from the surrounding reality, from your subconscious, the spirit, the universe, call it whatever you want. When your mind is noisy, when your mind is calm, you can turn inward and get that answer. That's the best way. I actually believe that rituals are made for those who still don't know how to connect directly with the spirit. And he needs to somehow catch his mind in the act of moving in a certain direction, to keep it occupied, to distract it, and give that power a chance to connect with you. That's why you need a regular ritual, because it's much easier to focus your attention for 2 hours when you've occupied that inner monkey with something. You jump around, shuffle, lay out cards, whatever. It's much easier and more convenient for beginners. For those who are already advanced, they can just sit down in a second, get their answers, and move on. That's it, but that's a certain level. You need to grow into it first.
So I wanted to tell you, since you brought this up, I'm not advanced in this sense, but I've been using a simple trick for many, many years, a coin. And when I have a yes or no question, I just flip it. It's just a regular coin. It has nothing to do with ion. It's just a plain coin. That's all. And I have someone moving things aside. I brought it up, pulled it out, but the most important thing here is that I unconditionally follow through with whatever comes up. No options.
That's exactly what I do.
And it works great because in that sense, I immediately trust the intention. Well, if the coin showed it that way, then that's how it should be.
That's exactly how it works. If you're flipping the coin again, it means you already have a decision and won't trust the Force's answers. The Force prefers when everything aligns with its intention. If you follow these symbols, the Force will guide you to do what it needs. So, if you flip the coin and act on its result immediately, then yes. And if you submit to these symbols, the Force won't have any choice but to show you the things that will provoke you to do exactly what it needs. So if you flip a coin and act unquestioningly as the coin tells you to do, right away, then yes, of course. Then it will work for you every time. If you are deceiving yourself, you do not have the courage to do as the coin showed, but at the same time you did not want it that way, then you do not have the courage. So basically, you're not ready to listen to the spirit, but just stay in the position you were in.
Yeah, I say the same thing, that you just have to follow through. It might be symbolism, maybe we're just overthinking things, but on the other hand, the way you do it, you then try to behave impeccably in carrying out that action. It's definitely a plus. The plus is really in your movement and development as a warrior. That's it, and after that, nothing else matters. And I have to say, that basically, every time I've used it, there's never been a situation where it came up in a way that felt uncomfortable or wrong, or where I regretted that choice. No.
It always comes up just the way it should. You just do everything and never worry about it. But there are also people, you know, who flip the coin, and if they don't like the outcome, they just do what they wanted anyway. So in that case, it means they didn't put any real force into it. They just weren't ready to act that way. The same applies, for example, to fortune telling at the Gus Chi coffee shop, their tarot cards, throwing dice, and so on, whatever. So, if you draw a tarot card that says, hey, the place you're headed to is a total mess, then based on that, you decide, okay, I'm not going, then it works. But if you flip again, hoping for a better outcome with the third card, then you're just resetting the results, and you lose all the power in that. That is, and based on this you decide, okay, I won't go, then it works. Flip again to reset the outcome. If you dislike the card's message, flip and reset. Deep down, you know everything. So if you really don't like what the card showed you, just flip again, reset the results, and stay where you were, not understanding or knowing anything. Even though deep down, you understand and know everything.
Of course, I think so too, yeah. The main thing here is not to fool yourself.
Just don't mess with the spirit, yeah.
Yeah, the next question is from Vasily Pupkin, who wants you to talk about abstract cores. I think this topic is just as abstract as the question itself. Well, let's go.
The topic is actually really cool. So, as soon as a person understands this topic, they get a clear idea of what the path looks like, how it should all unfold, and what exactly is happening with them right now. And there, Castaneda said that there are 21 abstract cores, but he only described about 6 at best. Let's list them and count. So, the first abstract core is the manifestation of spirit. The second abstract core is the knock of the spirit. The third one is the trick of the spirit. The fourth one is the descent of the spirit. The fifth is the requirement of intention. The sixth one is the management of intention. And the seventh, it seems, somehow, people are stretching it by the ears. It is a flight on the wings of intention. But this, in short, well, is generally not described directly in Carl Castaned's books. Yeah. So let's start with the first core, which is the manifestation of spirit. And the books say that the spirit manifests itself to everyone at every corner, but only the shamans are tuned in to interact with it. What does that mean? So, you step outside, and if you're paying attention, you'll see that everything is governed by a force and that spirit. So, when you are in a certain inner mood, you'll have a clear understanding that everything around you is not random. This is said in books in different ways many times. For example, a magician never encounters anyone by chance. If he bumps into someone, he knows it's the force that did it. Not because he's super aware or can dodge like Superman. It's because he knows if he bumped into someone, it wasn't by chance, and he needs to examine the situation closely. No, not for that reason. It's because he knows for sure that if he bumped into someone, it wasn't by chance, and he needs to look at the situation more closely. That's it. Although any shaman can also find themselves in situations at times where they get lost in thought, and something happens, and so on. So, they're not some kind of superhumans with supernatural abilities, as a rule. They're just regular people. This has been mentioned many times in the books. So, the manifestation of spirit is those experiences that go beyond normal perception. You know, like synchronizations and coincidences that seem illogical yet wonderful. Well, some synchronizations, unusual coincidences, things like that, which are, you know, not entirely logical but are still really wonderful. For example, you think about someone and that person calls you right away, and so on. But usually, that's not enough. For example, you thought about someone and the person immediately calls you, and so on. But that's usually not enough. In these cores, there are stories where the spirit appeared, but the person was distracted. Most people are too busy. Everyday worries paralyze. Because for most people, their attention is too paralyzed by all their daily affairs. I mean, the paralyzing influence of everyday worries.
Listen, that's the life of any one of us. Just take any person among us, and we're all completely wrapped up in ourselves. The reflection itself, we have indulgence, anything goes. We're completely in a tunnel, and right away, to see any signs of spirit, you need to open up to the outside. We're all completely in a tunnel, and right away, to see any signs of spirit, you need to open up to the outside. What all the practices of non-doing and everything else ultimately lead to, I think it's a long journey. And you can't just back out of it like that. You won't get any results. You need to act, and act with purpose. Only then will you open up, and maybe you'll even notice that you have neighbors living nearby, like those neighbors of yours. That's when you'll start to observe. Being observant, that's probably the first thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There is both a scientific and a non-scientific explanation for this. But the fact remains that if you don't have a certain clear mood, the so-called warrior, then it is very difficult for you to see this, and most people, when they encounter this, they quickly forget it, and that's it. So, you really need a special intention to see this. So, there's a second core, called the knock of the spirit. The knock of the spirit is when a force has chosen you for some reason, and it starts to tap on you. For me, it looked like this. I was standing at the bus stop, and there was a sign there. It just said on the announcement, if the spirit is knocking at your door, call. I really love stuff like that. I like it, you know, when everything is just laid out so simply, like for dummies.
Can you tell me, please, you mentioned that sign. There was just one. Where was it? So tell me, I'm just curious, was there a scene like that?
It was at the bus stop. A notice was posted. I thought, what the hell are these damn cultists?
Was it just one among others, or did you see it all by itself, like standing out?
There were a bunch of other announcements. Everything was covered up. I just turned around, looked there, and somehow I remember that phone for the rest of my life. I still remember it. I immediately think that these are some kind of cultists, and back then I was really, how should I put it? I was bored. I was always thinking about how to entertain myself. I was bored. I was always thinking about how to entertain myself. At the same time, I was interested in the topic. I decided to troll them. So, in the end, my friend and I called them and got this story. It was really interesting. The story developed in that I had a really cool experience and met this shaman. But the main idea is that in my case it was pretentious, but it is not always like that. That is, if we take, for example, how the knock of the spirit looked like for the same Dom Juan. He was shot when he was enslaved in some factory on a farm. Accordingly, he was shot, that is, his power forced him to continue interacting with her. And everyone has different experiences, you know? The tougher the whole situation is, the tougher the person becomes, and the force of the match pushes and manifests itself even more. That is, roughly speaking, it all depends on the character of a particular person. If a person is really resistant and not very self-aware, that force is going to hit them harder, you know? It's like that force knocking on their door. The knock of the spirit can look like an accident where you feel that something in this world needs to change, like something just isn't right. It can happen through some strong, shocking event, for example, when a woman leaves you or you lose everything you had, and so on and so forth. That moment when the force really starts to shake you up like that. It can happen through some strong, shocking event, like when a woman leaves you or you lose everything you had, and so on and so forth. That moment when the force really starts to shake you up like that. It's already noticeable. And most people still refuse in that case. Like, EW, that's not a thing. You know what's interesting that I've noticed? When people mostly call out to God. So, what situations do you think?
Well, obviously, it's in the worst situations, when everything is lost, when there are basically no options left, because before that, you didn't call out to God.
You know what pattern I've noticed. The force really shows up when you're in the toughest spot, and you start reaching out to it yourself. I mean, the very fact that you're starting to call on it already indicates that the situation in your life, everything that's happened, is all by the Spirit's command, right? You mostly don't like this situation because it's trying to push you out of that comfortable place you were in and move you somewhere else. And it's funny, just a funny coincidence. It's exactly at that moment when real power connects with you to start working with you. What do you pray to it for? Please, stop doing this. I want everything to go back to the way it was. Something like that.
No, well, you described that situation, yeah, basically. But you see, just before our call, I was talking to someone who has a slightly different situation, and you mentioned that his wife left him. Specifically, this situation. A guy who's been married for 45 years, and his wife is leaving him. This specific situation. A man married for 45 years faces his wife leaving him, and his world is collapsing. We won't delve into why, but his life is shattered. He's questioning how to move forward at 45, wondering about finding someone new and the point of it all. The question is whether he has the strength to continue, as many face similar life challenges. I won't find another one, so why bother? You see, the question is whether he has enough willpower to continue. I have examples of people who face similar situations where life hits them, right? They accept the situation, but they don't move forward further. They've hit a barrier, not at rock bottom, but they struggle to overcome. They then eventually accept this situation, but they no longer move forward. They're already at a point where they're not exactly hitting rock bottom, but they just can't seem to get past that hurdle, you know? They just live their lives and start to realize and remember how good things used to be, you know? They indulge in that whole process. By the way, I'm not saying that the Spirit's knock is a good thing. They just live their lives and start to realize and remember how good things used to be, you know? They indulge in that whole process.
By the way, I'm not saying that the knock of the Spirit is good. I'm saying it's good for those who are really ready to go through all the abstract layers and reach certain levels of awareness. You definitely need strength for that.
So, you want to say that this stress is the Spirit's knock? Of course.
And it comes in different ways. It's mostly stress for a person because it's an introduction to something you never even thought existed before. And everyone reacts to it differently. There are people who are really curious, like me, for example. Yeah, I'm super curious. I'm minimally stressed by all this. On the contrary, I'm really interested. Although I also feel stress when. Have you ever heard that expression from Castaneda? That the fabric of existence is terrifying in itself. The terrifying texture of existence. So, seeing things clearly is not a comforting thing, for starters. If you start to see, it's like all your nerves are exposed. Imagine when a tooth's nerves are exposed and someone touches it. When you start to see, it's like all your nerves are exposed. Imagine when your tooth is exposed and the nerves are touched. It's painful, and most people don't want to see it. They shut themselves off and say, no. This is the intention of most people, to just lock themselves in a capsule and say no, please, just no. And if this starts happening to them for some reason, they do everything they can to prevent it from happening. I can remember a bunch of stories from acquaintances, I'm sure you have some too, where they said, "Oh, I had accidental out-of-body experiences, and I was scared. I tried to stop it." I know so many people who prayed to God for it to stop happening to them. Can you believe it? They had this amazing chance to start practicing, and it was happening to them spontaneously. A lot of people dream of having that happen to them, but many are genuinely scared. Well, you know, yeah, you just mentioned some examples, but still, it's pretty rare, at least among my acquaintances, for something like that to happen. More often, people tend to embellish what happened to them, and they start imagining that it was something mystical or similar. Sometimes, I think it's just the mind playing tricks on them.
More often than not, people add to something that happened to him, and they begin to imagine that it was something mystical, something like that. And sometimes, it seems to me, it's more like tricks of the mind. Because when things like that happen, maybe in youth, a person really gets caught up in them, but as they get older, they just don't come around anymore. There are so many shields there that if you just hit it.
Yeah, the older you get, the less likely it is that this will happen to you. And that's really true because you start to have more things to hold on to. In a Mr. Freeman cartoon, a scene shows him wrapped in a web in front of a TV, symbolizing that when a person stops changing, death comes for them. This means they're done. They can't add to their life anymore, tangled in themselves. It's about maintaining tone, cleaning it up, and reflecting, as this helps discard unnecessary parts of oneself. So, he's really done. He can't add anything to his life anymore because he's so tangled up in himself. And that's really about how well they maintain their tone, how well they clean it up, and the importance of reflection, as they say, because that's where you work on throwing out the raw materials from yourself and forgetting them so they don't get in your way. In any case, when you still have that spiritual knock happening, it really doesn't mean much at all. You can easily choose to stop interacting with that spirit, and that's what most people do. In any case, when you're still feeling that spiritual knock, it really doesn't mean much at all. So, you can easily choose to stop interacting with that spirit, and that's what most people do. The next thing is actually a trick of the spirit. It is said in the story that when the spirit realized that the man had hammered the bolt and was no longer responding to the knocking, he decided to use a trick. The spirit's trick is exactly what's happening to you right now, guys. Because the spirit's trick is when they start telling you, you'll get amazing opportunities, there are beautiful worlds out there. There's so much interesting stuff there, you'll be able to dominate those around you with the Sith powers you'll acquire there, I don't know. So, they start feeding you all sorts of nonsense in different ways, trying to grab your attention so that you get really interested, right? So that it doesn't just feel like something forced, like, just do this because I told you to. So that you become genuinely interested and think, yeah, I really want to learn more about this now. And that didn't work in the stories either. It said that even that doesn't work on people. So, you walk up to someone and say, hey, what if you're actually doing something totally ridiculous because you're gonna die soon? But there are some cool things out there, like what if you could jump into a parallel world, chat with non-organic beings, maybe even extend your life or become immortal altogether?
How you said that, it's almost like the Jehovah's Witnesses.
A little bit differently. And people are like that, you know? They just go along with it. Go to hell, even listening to it won't help. That's why the spirit is more cunning. Its tricks are more serious. It gradually sets up the right situations for you, luring you in, making it so you get more and more caught in its trap. In most cases, and I'm no exception, people who embark on this path hope to gain something from it. They want to get a specific benefit out of it. And they have no idea what awaits them there. They're in for something completely different. But I'll say this, they're in for something much more wonderful. It's like a little kid who doesn't know this world yet. An adult offers him a trip to Disneyland, but he's just fiddling with his smartphone. He's not interested. And he's trying to get out of it with the adult. That's not in the realm of his enjoyment. He says, you guys go ahead, can I just not go, and so on. And then he rejoices when he actually gets there. Turns out, it's actually really cool. When they practically dragged him here by force, this situation happens quite often. So, we do the same thing. We're really no different from kids at all. A child differs from an adult simply in that he already has experience in specific areas of life. That's it. If you take someone, for example, and put them in an area of life where they have zero experience, you'll be a kid again.
Well, I can't agree with you on that. I have certain behavior patterns, unlike a child, and if I find myself in a different environment, I start acting based on those patterns. So, something's familiar to you.
If you find yourself in the second attention, you'll be like a baby there.
Yeah, I agree with that. How appropriate.
I told you, if something feels familiar, it means you have some experience there, and you tap into it. So, you activate your adult self in areas where you actually have experience. I'm saying, if you take a person and throw them into a situation where they have zero experience, like, say, drop them into some tribe that's never interacted with people and is ready to either eat them or not, they wouldn't understand, right? Most likely he will scream like a child and run around there, yelling. Some parts of his adulthood will kick in because, after all, he knows what death is from a spear and stuff like that. You see, he knows how to negotiate. Maybe he'll make some concessions, and if you offer something, he'll show it with gestures. He knows what he's seen in movies, what he's heard, but it's all too abstract. But I'm telling you, when you find yourself in the second attention, you become a child right away. You're not an adult. Your adulthood disappears completely. Adulthood is the accumulated knowledge in a certain state, in a specific position of the assembly point, right, conditionally. And the spirit is actually trying to lure you into a different position of the assembly point. And there's usually no experience at all. And that's why you don't go there. You don't even know what it is. You're trying. You're resisting in every way. Most people do everything they can to keep their assembly point from shifting the moment they wake up. They absolutely hate it when their assembly point shifts. It's super uncomfortable for people, mostly. If things go wrong, you'll feel like your vestibular system is broken. If it starts to go off the rails for you here, you'll begin to feel like your vestibular system is broken. It'll just seem to you that your positioning in this world is nothing like what you're used to. You might feel nauseous, and you will usually get stressed out if it happens unexpectedly. So, this thing is undesirable for people who aren't striving for it and don't really understand what they're doing. Even when you understand what it is, it can still be pretty freaky. Seriously, when it suddenly starts moving, everything around you begins to shift like this, everything changes, and you really have objects. So, you were looking at the chandelier, and it turned into some kind of spaceship. Damn, how is this even possible? I'm talking about experiences where I didn't use any substances at all, just shifted my assembly point. With your eyes wide open. It's really freaking awesome. But on the other hand, it's also pretty freaky. So, the next point is, after the spirit tries to pull a trick, and here it is, let's say, it's trying to do that. Actually, everyone is in this situation right now. One way or another, the spirit tries to lure him in, like, look at me, and it has created a whole bunch of religions, or whatever, to do that.
Well, then please answer, what's the point? For the spirit to lure everyone in. For me, the idea was that when you accumulate a certain amount of personal power, you become a kind of trigger, and then the spirit becomes interested in you. Well, again, I'm trying to. But what's the point of it to absorb everyone? So tell me, well.
Let's take this example. The university wants everyone.
Well, let's ask the question too. Those who got in there. To get into the university, you need to show a certain intention. Again, personal power, money, it doesn't really matter. Not everyone gets into the university. Some people won't be able to.
I'm not saying that everyone gets in there. I'm asking a question. Does it want everyone or not? It's a simple question. Does the university want everyone? No. But what is he doing? He's doing advertising. We're awesome. Come on over, everyone who can.
Those who can. Again, for those who have enough intention and opportunity.
There are stages where they filter you out. It's the same year. The spirit manifests the same way for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're on the wall or not. It's irrelevant. It manifests the same way for everyone. The point is that only certain mindsets. Pay attention to it initially, and this is already the first level. From here on, going further down the line, in the end, only a small number of people are left. Just a handful, I would say. Becoming a billionaire, in my opinion, is easier than becoming a seer. That's how it seems to me, yes, because I tried to do both, and I know that at least everything is clear there. That is, when you develop as a businessman there. You start earning more millions, at some point you understand that it works, there is logic, and you just follow it in. Hustle. It feels like there's no logic here. There are certain tools that can increase your chances, but no one is ever going to guarantee you anything, ever. There's no guarantee, that's it. So, not just one. That's why I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I'm against selling spiritual services for money in the first place. Because that's nonsense. You usually don't have that power. Even if you have personal power. Imagine if you're, say, a vice president and you sell your authority to some people off the street. That's called a bribe. You can pull it off. Basically, a few cases will work for you until they eventually catch up with you for it. And those who see it, no one will even hear them later. It's probably better to just put them in jail, metaphorically speaking. So, as a conduit for the spirit and the power that you don't actually possess, you can only ask. You can't directly ask for money in return. You tell a person, I might do it, or I might not. It depends on the spirit. I can ask, but definitely give me the money first.
I'll tell you for sure, throughout human history, that's what people have been doing. They sell what they don't have. Right. And how many, remember, again, how many healers, how many sellers of remedies? This has been going on for centuries, if not millennia. That's exactly what this person is selling. And now, and how many psychics are there who, again, will let you clean your karma or do something else to you? People are literally cashing in.
I'm saying that they can't guarantee anything. In some cases, the spirit already knew, and the force was going to repair this person, conditionally, yes, and he simply passed through this guy, because he needed to see these special effects. But in most cases, the person sitting there, the fortune teller or whatever, if you were to sit them down and start experimenting with them, they wouldn't give you anything, obviously, because they don't possess that power. So there's this guy who was upset about Kartar. I agree with him on that point, but I don't agree with his approach, which is a bit too fanatical. Because sometimes something might actually work, why not? It's just that if you use it correctly, so to speak, everything has two sides to the coin. You can use it the right way, or you can use it the wrong way. If you encounter something and use it incorrectly, that doesn't mean it's not real or that it doesn't work. That's why the warrior's path exists. And there's that part, to let go without letting go. Is it not working right now? Okay, but that doesn't mean it will never work at all.
Well, you see, yeah, I can understand the person's position here, because right now, especially, it seems like we're in an enlightened age to some extent, but we're still just like in the middle. Ages, watching, fortune tellers, and psychics. You see, I don't know, I mean, it's probably everywhere, but there are entire channels dedicated to this. And how many of them try to say that it's all a lie, that these scammers are proving, supposedly with regular scientific methods, that they can't do anything, and their only goal is to make money. So I think that people here just have that attitude. I'm pretty critical too. I basically think that it's mostly a scam. After all, in life, I know from my own experience, there's no such thing as a free ride. And even if you say that a spirit is knocking on your door, you can't just expect it to happen for nothing. You have to do something for it. In life, I know from my own experience, there's no such thing as a free ride. And even if you say that a spirit is knocking on your door, you can't just expect it to happen for nothing. You have to do something for it. You need to work on yourself. And you don't just become a millionaire out of nowhere.
Take Dom Juan, for example. He didn't do anything for that. He didn't even want it at all. The spirit knocked on him in the form of a bullet, actually.
Yeah, it knocked. And then there was so much fear, right? I mean, it's a process that continues with him. How many times did he try to back out after that? And then his Nawal, Julian, would. I mean, it's work that continues with him. How many times did he try to back out after that? And then his Nawal, Julian, would. With different methods, and when he scared him again with allies, it was still work that he had to overcome.
But this work isn't usually from the side of the person the spirit is knocking on. So, up to a certain point, up to the fifth abstract core, maybe the fourth, right? No, up to the fifth. There, for the most part, the person doesn't really want anything yet. So, the force is still pulling him there. That's why it said that on the path of magicians, there are no volunteers, right? Because if you're such a volunteer, usually it means that you want to have something with this power, and it's like this. And I don't want you to have anything from me. I actually want you to serve me, not the other way around, right? That's why it's strange that if someone came voluntarily, I want to serve there. If he puts this issue like this, then the powers will most likely look at him. But if it's not fair and he really just wants to have sex with her, then that's a different question. It's automatically picked up, you know? It's easy to understand a person and what intentions they came with. Although even in this case there is the so-called dark side of the Force. Yes, where there is also a story about such things. Spirit's manifestation and descent. The knock of the spirit, and in general, to all these abstract cores, yes, then comes the fourth core. This is the manifestation of the spirit, the descent of the spirit. More precisely, this is the first manifestation, the descent of the spirit. This place right here is the point of no return. When this happens to you, after that, guys, your life will definitely never be the same. It happened to me unexpectedly. I didn't even know it was coming. After that, I started to perceive the spirit and understand it's the main thing. Before, I valued out-of-body experiences, foreseeing the future, shaping reality. Anything that seemed cool, like Sith powers. But I didn't see the spirit in any of that. I was reading Castaneda books, thinking that was the spirit. It was like something in the background, like trees. The spirit and power felt like that to me. It turned out the central part of everything is about that in the books. Well, it was something in the background. Kind of like those trees we have somewhere in the background. That's how the spirit and the power felt to me, you know. It turned out that the central part of everything is actually all about that in the books. So, when does the descent of the spirit happen to you? First of all, don't miss it. So, it's like a silent knowledge starts talking to you. It happens from the inside, you know? When the rules of the game open up, when you're told how the world is actually structured around you and so on, it comes from within. It's that silent knowledge. I can only compare it to when a computer is loaded with information from a disk. It's in the form of zeros and ones, and that's what silent knowledge is. The process of interpreting it is what the mind does next to start talking about it, right? So, when the computer is loaded with this information, it kind of knows right away what it is because all the bits and bytes are in place. And the process of interpreting it is already what the mind does next in order to start talking about it somehow, right? That is, when a computer has downloaded this information, it immediately knows what it is, because everything, all the bits and all the bytes are in place. To understand and interpret this knowledge, you start using language elements, turning it into images, sounds, and feelings. It originates from within you. The spirit's descent shifts your assembly point strongly. But it comes from nowhere, really from within you. Here is the descent of the spirit. It shifts your assemblage point, firstly, very strongly, immediately. In that moment, my vision opened up and I started seeing clearly. Silent knowledge flows to you, showing how everything is arranged. All those talks about our connection and collective consciousness are true. You see it. This power is in everyone, manifesting through each person. Many books discuss this, but it's true. That is, all this talk about how we are all connected, that we are all, as it were, in one big common pile of co-consciousness. Yes, this is reality. You really begin to see it. You understand that this power is in everyone. It manifests through each person, and there are so many books written about this. I don't want to repeat myself 100 times, but it's really true. It kicks in, and after that, there's no turning back, that's it. You've already been through something like that. Your old worldview falls apart, and a new one begins. After that, all you have left is controlled stupidity. You can't perceive the world normally after that. Whoever you talk to, you start to bring strength into everything, no matter what's happening to you. Of course, after a while, you might experience some confusion, light. So, you can just forget all of that somehow. But that's it. So after a while, it will still bring you back to this, and again, and more flashes of the spirit will happen to you. So this is the path that's been destined for you from this moment on. You won't be able to get off it anymore, no matter how much you want to, even if you try to run away.
I remember the journey to Ixtlan, especially the final part when Hinara talks about it. He metaphorically expresses that his ally is so far away, trying to return home to Ixtlan but couldn't. It's a loss of form, and for him, the world is ending. He had to rebuild himself, saying everyone else on the path were just ghosts, and only Don Juan was real. I felt that same feeling. He had to rebuild himself, and in the end, he said that everyone else on the path were just ghosts, and the only real one for him was Don Juan.
Yeah, by the way, I felt that exact same feeling. I had this episode where a shaman just went ahead and set up a whole ceremony for transitioning to another dimension, as he called it. In reality, it looked really funny. I was just cracking up at him. It seemed to me like he was doing some crazy stuff. Then he explained that he wasn't dragging us in the physical world, but in the energetic one. He hooked our energetic bodies and dragged them far away. And then I was blown away. That's real, because in life, I started encountering things where my memory was telling me one thing, but in reality, everything was different, and the people around me were telling a different story. And everyone started to seem like ghosts to me too. Everyone feels fake, because, well, you're talking to a person, and you both just have different memories of the past. This is intense. It at least really shifts you a lot. You start to think, either you've gone crazy, or this really happened to you. Either the person next to you, who's with you, is just messing around or something like that. So, in any case, you start to feel this kind of confusion. Here, only controlled stupidity helps. So you're not shouting, you're not the one, you're an outsider, and so on. If you start acting like that, you'll get caught and they'll lock you up.
Yeah, we know where.
That's why Castaneda is a handsome guy. He made it so that he could show this whole world, talk about it, and even explain how not to get caught in the process. There's this movie called They Live, I think. The main character accidentally found some glasses that let him see that, it turns out, some people aren't actually people. And so he started acting really provocatively. He started reacting to them, yelling at them, and so on. So he didn't turn on the controlled stupidity, and he started reacting too seriously. And for that, they totally freaked him out, of course. Well, the answer is obvious. If you see some junk, instead of a person, don't stare at them, yell at them, and ask who they are and react like that. Just act like they're not even there. That's what controlled stupidity is all about. Act like he's not even there. This is controlled stupidity. Take it easy, take a sneak peek, but don't get caught, in short. Because, well, this world is more complicated than you think. It's not just people hanging out here. I've personally seen non-people walking around here. These are some creatures that disguise themselves as them. And if I were just pointing at them like that, I honestly don't know what would happen to me. That's creepy. You just walk around thinking, Lachlan, I'm just pretending I don't see anything.
Listen, but they're supposed to sense your intention. Not just your intention, but that you're even aware of them.
If you focus on them for too long, they'll catch on too, that's a fact. So there's that. But again, they have doubts too. Maybe you had some kind of glimpse or something. Anyway, if you don't pay too much attention, you won't have that problem, that danger. It's best to quickly turn away from them and just observe them briefly, but don't stare at them. In short, if you don't pay so much attention, you don't have such a problem, such a danger. It's best to quickly turn away from them and just observe them briefly, but don't stare at them. I remember a time when I was in a really messed up state walking through the park, and a little kid saw me. Little kids under 2 years old, they can really see you. And he's walking like that, pointing his fingers at you. And he's just looking, pointing right at his mom. And the mom's like, you can't point at the uncle? I'm just looking and thinking, cool. Since childhood, we're taught to just not see. For real. So they're showing him that he shouldn't do that. Keep an eye on the kids, seriously. They notice so much. They can see until they're 2 years old, not until 2 years old.
Until you learn to talk, yeah? As soon as the conversation starts.
This, by the way, is about the inner dialogue and so on. It's really interesting that at the core of many practices, it's said that you need to stop this inner dialogue. So, a lot of meditations talk about this, and many religions mention it too, inner silence and all that. There's, for example, Vipassana, which is all about that. So, the funny thing is that recently, pretty much everyone who's been keeping up with the news has seen that artificial intelligence has started to pop up. ChatGPT and other guys that show signs of intelligence. It turned out, to put it very briefly, that they just took all the sentences, all the words we had. And based on that, they started building a statistical prediction machine to figure out what the next word should be in a sentence if certain words are in front of it. And that's it. And to form words, statistically based on that. It turned out that this is intelligence. So, our inner dialogue is actually intelligence. It's just funny. So the very language we use is that same flyer, right? And when Cassandra said that it was given to us by predators who flew to our planet, and so on, well, this already sounds a little bit more logical, even from such a more scientific point of view. If someone, for example, handed over this neural network, this large language model, that's what it's called now, right? They wrote into our neurons, so it's not surprising. We gained tools, yeah, we developed logical thinking, but we lost the ability to see because of that. The next abstract core is about the requirement of intention. So, as soon as you have that divine grace, after a while, you realize that the coolest thing you can do in this world, the only desire you have left, is to strengthen your connection with the Spirit. And your only intention becomes to have more of that intention. It just makes sense. Whoever doesn't do it this way just won't move forward. So, you're constantly trying to tune into this external intention. If we're talking about Ixtlan, he calls it external intention, right? It's called that in Castaneda. Spirit, strength, and so on, right? You know, whenever you have a moment of freedom, when your worries let go, you start to feel this genuine inner intention, like wanting to have more spirit in your life. This is called the requirement of intention. And the next abstract core talks about managing intention. So, as soon as you get into that thick flow of intention, spirit, or whatever else from that series, well, it doesn't really matter what words I'm using for this, right? You start to manage intention. So, it feels really strange. At the same time, you are the intention itself, so it seems to you that you're now controlling everything around you. It looks like a miracle. Turn the tape recorder on, turn it off, the devices turn on and off, you can generate events. This is just a real fairy tale. You really start to feel like Bruce Almighty. Seriously, this is straight from there. You've merged into the overall power, so it feels everything is by your will. If you try to bring back ego, what about the money? You'll hit a wall. That's why you feel that all this is happening according to your will, although it is. If you try to bring in that tiny bit of your ego that was there before, right? The one that says, what about the money in the account? Let it just appear for free. That's where you're gonna hit a wall. You immediately get kicked out of the flow, and it's like, you know, everything just stops. The funny thing is, when you're in that power, in the spirit, you feel its intention as your own. You immediately get kicked out of the flow, and it's like, you know, that's it. The thing is, when you're in that power, in the spirit, you feel its intention as your own. And they're usually even more interesting than anything you could come up with. Kids, it's like a child. You know, what kind of adventures can they come up with? Right. Adults come in and show them much more interesting adventures. Even if you take away, for example, the toys that adults bring, it all still comes from the outside originally. The child would not have thought to do this if he had not been shown. Therefore, in a person's life, everything most interesting, as a rule, comes from a higher order of forces. And most people, they're like kids. They've closed themselves off at the sandbox level and are like, I'm good here. I'm just building my sandcastles. Can you please not distract me? They say, come on, let's get out of the sandbox. Listen, there's more we can do. Look, you can ride a toy car over there. Is that the spirit? Yeah, that's what they say comes from it. And the person says, no, 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 I still want to play in the sandbox. So all these abstract cores just describe the step-by-step process of what happens to you when you embark on the path of knowledge, the path of power. That's all. Abstraction, which is why they call it abstract cores. It happens differently for everyone, but structurally it always looks like this. Manifestation, a knock. A trick, a descent, a demand for intention, managing intention.
The next question from, I'll try to name them correctly, is about Braun in 1768. Then think about the books by Tasha Belair, Florine de Donner, and Divination.
Yes, I don't think anything. I've read them, of course, except for the last Divination. I don't know. I haven't read it. I can say that Florinda is still more or less interesting. There's some information about dreams there. I'm not really sure, to be honest, if they actually had any real connection to Castaneda, because there are both similarities and differences. Some things contradict, while others are okay, especially with Abelard. Something that contradicts, something that is okay, especially Abelard. But honestly, she sounds a bit strange to me. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there, like the Wheel of Time and more. If I'm not mistaken, of course. I think she wrote that.
Are you talking about the last final book by Castaneda, The Wheel of Time?
The Wheel of Time.
From Castaneda, I didn't know.
Yeah, they had that book by Castaneda. That's what it was called. And I also don't think he did it. Most likely, the publisher took the opportunity to cash in a bit more for free at the end, and that's it. I think it really has nothing to do with them at all.
I personally skipped those books too. I haven't read them at all.
In short, Florinda also has some interesting ones, I think. The Life of Dreams and The Witch's Dream, if I'm not mistaken about the titles of the books. I definitely read all of them, but not like Castaneda, not multiple times, yeah, because I read some of them just twice. And I can say that there's very little practical stuff in there. So there's a description of the female version of war, right? Like Castaneda's got a male perspective on how everything goes down. Well, Florinda is more or less suited for women, because there are practices that specifically relate to women, due to the fact that they have a uterus and so on and so forth. But again, I'm not sure that it's a legitimate thing in itself. Because from my experience, there are a ton of things that didn't repeat and so on. But then again, I'm not a woman. Maybe a woman could say something about it better than I can.
That's actually a good topic. Well, if we had a girl, a woman, a representative on the channel who also wanted to share a lot or chat about this topic. I have the feeling that we mostly have male staff.
I think it makes some sense, but in any case, I think Castaneda's books are pretty comprehensive when it comes to what to do. If you're reading them, that's more than enough. If you want to get inspired by this kind of topic, then these books that are provided here are great too. Why not? So if you're reading them, that's more than enough. If you want to get inspired by such topics, then these books that are provided here, they are also cool. Why not? You can get inspired by reading them, especially if you're a woman, because it's all a bit more from a female perspective. But then again, not to exclude the fact that there's a good chance these women just latched onto the fame of Castaneda and made some money off of it, and that's it. Well, yeah. But again, not to exclude the fact that there's a good chance these women just latched onto Castaneda's fame and made some money off of it, and that's it.
Well, actually, yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff in there that I just can't wrap my head around. It doesn't resonate with the experience. It just doesn't match up, that's all.
Here's the next question from Alex. I think this person is already one of our regular contributors on the forum. Here he asks the next question. The question is about a student's social life, how to build their social life in a way that strengthens their tonal and avoids future issues with progressing on this path due to social problems and conditioning.
That's a really cool question, and I'm actually working on that myself right now. In short, you need to become rich, really rich.
There you go. You know, that was one of the last questions from the current ones that we didn't get to add to the list, but it specifically asked about one of the guys, I think. His nickname is Dot. He asked how to combine wealth with all this nonsense.
It's also a great workout. That is, those who do not understand this, I call them spiritual homeless. So basically, they're like, maybe I won't do anything for this world, but I just want everyone around me to serve me and do everything for me. What are money for? It's basically the equivalent of gratitude from other people for what you've done for them, or their promises to do something good for you. And the best of what they can do, in a different way, to serve you for what you've done for them. Oh, if you're not practicing service, it means you don't know how to surrender to the force so it can guide you and move you to the places you need to be. The funny thing is, you give it your tasks. You say, I want to experience this particular thing. And it integrates you into the bigger picture and says, the road to that looks like these actions, which you might not even understand yourself. Just do what I tell you, and you'll get to where you asked to go. At the same time, it manages to align with some more global intentions and plans. Just do what I tell you, and you'll get to where you asked to go. At the same time, she still manages to combine it with some more global intentions and plans. So you become part of a global intention. If you're not learning and practicing how to serve people, how to do it better, then at that moment, you're basically just someone who's always demanding something from others.
Hold on a second. Tell me that one more time. When it comes to serving people, I understand one thing. But I see earning money a bit differently because, in the end, when you earn money, you're really doing it for yourself. Then a person can cross that line where they start wanting more and more money. We'll get back to the cartoon about the wildebeest in a minute. So, when a person serves others, they can really... Well, let's take a good example in church. A person goes out and serves others. He might not even ask for money. People will just bring him donations. There, in our churches, in India or somewhere, there are saints, or not even saints, just yogis sitting around. They don't do anything. They just help people do things, and people bring them food. Serving people, serving. So where can I make some money?
Listen, you know, there are different kinds of service, as they say, right? And no one has cancelled the fact that there are dark ways to serve, serving dark forces, yeah, serving the dark side of the force. And then there are light ways. Light ways are when you give a person a piece of their life back as a result of your service. How does this relate to money? Let me give you an example. You want to change the oil in the car. If you go to do it yourself for the first time, it will take you several hours, maybe half a day, maybe a day, maybe you will even break something there, and you will have even more adventures. You'll get all dirty, swear, and so on. You can go to a special station where they'll take care of it for you and change that oil in 15 minutes, and tell you how much it'll cost. In the end, the price ensures you save time. If you earn 1,000 rubles a day and the oil change costs 500 rubles, doing it yourself would take a whole day, saving you half a day. If you have some kind of salary, let's say you earn, I don't know, 1,000 rubles a day, just as an example, an abstraction. If they tell you that the oil change service will cost 500 rubles, and you would have spent the whole day doing it yourself, then obviously, you've gained half a day of your life. You won't have to spend your personal time on that hassle. In other words, you're getting a piece of your life back. You won't have to spend your personal time on that hassle. So, they're giving you a piece of your life back. That's it. And that's how most of the cool, awesome businesses in this world work. So, all businesses that give you back what you... For example, you can take an open pack, pour yourself some cereal, cook it, and eat it, right? You don't have to be out in the fields like they were 100 years ago and gather that grain there. Otherwise, you would have just spent way more time on it. Now there are wonderful smart people there who have come up with combined operators that do all this for you. That's it, they tell you. You give a small part of your life in the form of money because money is a piece of your life. You spent your life renting yourself out to someone so they would give you that money, right? If you go to work. When you do that, you realize that you're giving away 1 unit of your life, and in return, you get 10. You spent your life renting yourself out to someone so they would give you that money, right? If you go to work. When you do that, you realize that you're giving away 1 unit of your life, and in return, you get 10. Is it worth it? It's worth it. Cool. There are dark services that create the illusion that you'll get more. For example, there are various cults around which, for instance, I won't name names right now to avoid bothering the fanatics who support all this, but there are a bunch of figures who build these, as you said I call them, spiritual drugs around themselves. So you go there, and what do? They listen to you, they calm you down. But the thing is, it doesn't really help you in the end because you're not solving your problem, your issue. For example, you're not great at communicating with others. Your wife doesn't love you because of that and is leaving you, right? So, you weren't able to establish communication with her. You can go, read some books, learn how to do it right, so you can either make up with her and deal with it, or next time, so everything goes smoothly for you. Or you can go to those kinds of ministers, and they'll start telling you something like, well, to put it very briefly, everything's fine, you're okay, don't worry. Yeah, that's it. And you're like, okay. That's pretty much how vodka works. So you have a bunch of problems, your boss is yelling at you, you've got issues with your wife, and you're like, oh, there's this little shot, I'll just pour myself one, and bam, problem solved. So, you don't feel anything negative anymore because the sensors that tell you that everything's bad have turned off. So, what do these cult ministers do? They know how to push the right buttons in your brain, how to pull the levers, and they create the feeling that everything's okay, that you don't need to do anything.
Well, I think it happens differently here too. Listen, cult ministers sometimes operate in a completely different way. They immediately tell you have big problems, young man or young lady, and you can't solve them without us. And to solve them, you need to take 100 steps. But for every step, you'll have to pay a little bit with your own money. And that's the best option for everyone. I mean, the most familiar option.
Because you end up giving more than they give you.
They don't give you anything at all. Let's start with that.
I see it like a carnivorous plant. They throw some bait at you. It's tasty. The insects gobble it up. There are also destructive cults that really suck everything out of you. They lure you in. It's tasty. It has some carbohydrates. Insects eat it.
Well, you can. But there are destructive cults that really suck all this stuff out of you. They lure you in. Well, the point is for you to give everything away, basically. And he brought his friends along too, who also.
It's the same as being eaten by that flower, right, if you're an insect. But before that, they throw something at you, like, let me tell you, I have this really cool story about this topic. I won't tell you the whole thing, but the idea is that there's this cult called Aum Shinrikyo, right? The leader of the Aum cult, Asahara, I think he's already passed away, but back then he was still alive, sitting somewhere in a prison in Japan. Powerful events occurred. Through actions and meditations, one tapped into egregore, a vast energy, opening up for 3 days, seeing cosmic wonders. So, imagine, as a result of certain actions, certain meditations, a person would tap into this egregore, this huge amount of energy. And for 3 days, it just opened him up completely. He walked around for 3 days, seeing all kinds of cosmic wonders. Naturally, after that, the person is caught for good. So they were pumping him up. It's like a loan, right? They give you, for example, 3 of your salaries, and they tell you you can spend it in a day, hypothetically, right? And you're like, cool. But then you'll be paying for it for years, until you give back everything with interest multiple times. It's the same here. So again, there are different kinds of cults. There are destructive ones, and there are positive ones. Some of them actually serve the purpose of calming you down, because not all anxieties are about needing to solve something right now. Sometimes, you really get worked up. And then, if the priest told you something right, and you listened to it, and it helped you, and you stopped stressing over things that didn't really matter, over trivial stuff, and started acting in a more reasonable and harmonious way, then that's a plus. That's why I never say there's absolute evil, and then there's normal. No, there are just a lot of people, let's say, who make a profit off of that. That's why I never say that there is absolute evil, and there is normal. No, it's just that there are a majority, let's say, who profit off of that. So, when you listen to spiritual teachers who just calm you down, I mean, you listen, and then you think, well, that's it, I don't need to do anything, everything's great. It's like you probably took a spiritual drug. It just relaxed you, made you feel good.
Well, even in the Orthodox Church, we don't really see that happening. And if you go there, they'll make you work in one way or another to cleanse yourself. They won't force you, but you can't sit. You need to pray. Fast. You need to pray. First of all, fast, do all of that.
They say all the right things, if it comes down to it.
Yeah, I'm talking about the destructive ones that lure you in with that. They lure you in. They say you'll get it, quickly. The same goes for Scientologists.
Scientologists and everyone else. I just don't want to name names specifically. But even with Scientologists, they offer something. I know a lot of people who are there. I don't think it's cool to go and be a sanitarian. I've seen people rise up. They get a program that changes their mindset, improving their lives. But now, they must give 30% to Scientology for life. You need to examine who Scientology helped and who gained nothing. Only now they have to give 30%, if I'm not mistaken, to Scientology for life from all their income.
Yeah, you need to take a sample to evaluate its impact. No easy solution. Be wise and learn from any sect or cult.
That's why I say that there is no silver bullet, like, let a fool pray to God, and he will break his forehead. Right. If you're in your right mind, you can take the best from any of these sects or cults and walk away.
If you understand you have to work for everything, it's easier to live with it. Regarding money, it comes down to earning, socialization, and more. If consumed by money, you'll put a lot of energy into it. And regarding the same question, about money, it's the same thing. It all comes down to earning, socialization, and everything else. What if you're consumed by money? Again, that's just my point of view, but you'll end up putting a lot of energy into it. And it's not always a trade-off. The same thing, let's take those taxes on oil, for example, cars, and so on. Where does all this lead to? To the point that, first of all, they're not just taking a part of your money anymore. They're offering you to pay a lot more for that service. And again, you're missing out on certain experiences. Suddenly, you need to be shown once how to change the oil or how to replace the tire. And you do it yourself, and later on, you save a ton of time and money.
Well, the path you are describing now, like all by yourself.
Not myself.
That's the ethos path. I don't need anyone. Disconnecting from power. Power invites, join us, access our knowledge. Because power says, join us. We have this collective consciousness here, right? I mean, shared knowledge. You get access to this database. And the only thing you need to strictly follow is one simple rule. If they ask, give it. If you need, ask for it. That's it. Yeah, but we can definitely debate that. And therefore, if you look at how huge states developed, yes, all those who were able to start acting like this, yes, even through language and communication, and not through force and spirit, they all became great. All those who tried to be able to do everything at once in each person, that is, with multifunctional tools like that, yes, they all waste too much time on this, because you cannot become a master in each of these things. So, you need to know how to delegate. As a person who constantly builds businesses, I know this for sure. I used to start by doing everything myself, learning everything on my own, but then I realized that it's good to know certain things, of course, what you need to know to build a business. But you absolutely have to trust others. If you're bringing people in, and you tell them, do this, you're not keeping an eye on whether they did it the way you thought it should be done. The main thing is to get the results you need for work, for the business. In the end, you're doing what you trust others with. Besides just yourself, your one favorite, you trust everyone else, and they really speed up your progress a lot and fast. So, in that way, I went from some ridiculous money that teenagers earn to many millions. And I'll tell you what it gives you. This frees your link to intention from the paralyzing influence of everyday worries. Because from now on you can allow yourself, for example, if you have a ton of money, you can allow yourself to take 10 years and do nothing at all except rewatch. And now, for someone who doesn't have finances and resources, what choices do they have? They have the choice to give as little as they can to society while taking as much as they can, to be fed, to have their bodies taken care of, and so on, right? And dedicate all your free time to those spiritual practices. It's such a demonic story. Take more, give less.
Wait, it's never going to work out for you in the first place if I want more given to me, and I. You can't get more and give less. That just doesn't happen.
I know a bunch of people who invested in crypto, and they did just that. They didn't do anything useful.
It's me again, and you're leading to what I'm talking about. For me, there's no such thing as free stuff. To me, crypto is also a kind of promise of free money, like when you're mining or buying something.
They spent a ton of cash.
Not everyone operates that way. Not everyone operates that way. Some people really have to work their butts off. So, he really works hard, and he gets paid for his labor. And that's tough too.
So, you know what the story is. There's a story that you can use deception to get more anyway. It's always tied to deception. For example, a person takes on 10 remote jobs at the same time, gives a little bit everywhere, and ends up making a ton of money, like 10 times more. That was common when the pandemic first started. And right now, we won't list all the options, but they exist. And those who want to find them always do. I know people like that.
But those are also shady options, and the majority of people, they just go about their lives. Like, there's this one guy who works changing oil at an auto service. That's his specific job, and that's it. He only does that. He doesn't practice anything else. He does exactly what you call giving the bare minimum he can. Like, he gets the minimum he's entitled to. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that most people live like that. It's not about giving the minimum and getting the maximum. People work their best years for others, missing personal growth.
It's not about those who give the minimum and get the maximum. These people still don't have the opportunity to practice anything because they spend their whole lives, the best part of it, renting it out, to some other person who's building a business.
I'll also remember again about Don Juan and all the people who were involved in whatever they were doing. They had jobs, for the most part. He worked at a stable, and Don Juan, when he moved on, they were doing regular jobs before he became an owner there.
They were already kind of spoiled by the group of magicians, you know? There was the owner of the whole estate, Noel Julian, and he inherited all of this quite a bit.
Remember those he was talking about.
If you take Don Juan, he was a shareholder, yeah, in cotton factories and stuff like that, so he also had passive income. None of them were poor.
Don Vicente, I remember, who sold medicines. Then, remember there was a magician who actually danced.
He was selling medicines until he met the group. Then they gave him a huge space to grow. They all did something in their everyday lives. I'm not saying otherwise.
Yeah, I'm saying they had a regular business there. When they joined the group of magicians.
You see, when you have a group of magicians who say, okay, we have a resource, energy. What were these magicians really doing? They were renting out their energy to be used right, in different ways, so Don Juan was lending him energy to see new worlds, shift his assemblage point. He gave him the chance to live there, eat, and take a break from worries. The same happened with Don Juan and each Nawal. They all had this structure and wealth. They owned estates. The same thing happened with Don Juan himself, with each of the Nawals. They all already had this structure, and at the same time, this wealth was certain. They had entire estates, so none of them were poor. I actually made that mistake myself back in the day. When I first arrived on the exotic islands, you know what I was expecting? I was expecting that the oldest, most ethereal old man would probably be a magician. Yeah, like some kind of hermit living way out in the sticks. I was expecting that the oldest, most ethereal old man would probably be a magician. Yeah, like some kind of hermit way out in the sticks. I found someone like that and started asking him if he knew any magicians and so on, in my broken English. And I quickly realized that he was just a weak person. He really had no power. In fact, the coolest magicians hang out with the top dogs. And very quickly I became convinced that this was just a weak person. He really had no strength. And actually, the coolest magicians hang out with the top dogs. It's an illusion that you'll meet magicians who are just sitting there saying, I have nothing material, and so on. They won't be known to everyone. Downshifters are basically those people who want to do less and get more, usually. They found a cool way. They spend less on taking care of their bodies, but they earn money somewhere else. Or they've already earned it. For example, from Moscow, selling his apartment, he moved somewhere in India, and that money would last him for 10 years if he spends it carefully. That's also an option. Why not?
Right, that makes sense.
But anyway, if we're going to answer that question, it's really complicated, actually, because the first task of a magician is to free their connecting link from the consuming influence of everyday worries. If he doesn't do that, he'll never be able to gain personal power, and I don't see any other way to do it. You know what I did? How did I manage it for the first time? I found a way to work only 4 hours a day, really focused, and I built my business, which brought me a good profit. The rest of the hours I devoted to dreams, yoga, working with my consciousness, and so on. And because I had 12 hours a day to myself and only needed to work 4, I made really quick progress. In just 2 months, I went from not being able to practice at all to the point where I could just dive straight into dreaming. Right now, I've lost that ability again because after that, I moved on to the next level. In just 2 months, I went from a level where I couldn't do anything at all, like practice at all, to the point where I could just dive straight into dreaming. Now I have lost this opportunity again, because after that I came to the next level again. But again, it took me 2 months to go from being a complete beginner, where I was just having occasional lucid dreams, to the point where I could dive straight into dreaming every single day for a week. I had some experience, you know, like I would see something randomly, about once a week for 6 years. To the point where I could just dive straight into dreaming every single day for a week. You just go in there and practice something. So basically, you've already passed through the first gate just by reading the dream. So if you start trying to do something like that, you quickly realize that. Unless you're free from this world, either by having a lot of money or someone else taking responsibility for you, you're going to hit a ceiling. Basically, you run into the fact that you need to practice dreaming more, for example, and that takes up your time. Dreaming doesn't really happen during the time you're asleep, actually. So basically, you run into the fact that you need to practice dreaming more, for example, and that takes up your time. Dreaming doesn't really happen while you're asleep, actually. While you're sleeping, you can't really dream. They're like plus hours. So if you want to dream, you'll be doing it during the time when you're usually awake. So we run into the issue that as long as you're not making a decent income, and as long as you have kids, they're pulling at you from all sides. Dad, mom, they're pulling your attention. If you're just not free, then how can you even think about directing your attention somewhere else? You can invest a little bit here and there so you don't get completely lost, and somehow find a way to lighten your connection with your intention. But basically, every day, as long as you haven't solved that problem, you'll be throwing these really dumb requests out into the universe. Can I please have a little bit of money? Can I have a car? Can I have that? And so on. And it'll try to serve you in some way. But sorry, that's what everyone wants. Just wanting the same thing all the time, like wanting more. Power to connect is going to be tough for you.
No, well, wait a minute. If a person doesn't have enough personal power and intention, I think they'll find a way in many situations. I remember the second book by Castaneda. I think it was the second one, where they were sitting in a restaurant and saw kids picking at leftovers. Do you remember that episode? And Carlos said that he was very sorry, and then Dunhan, if I remember correctly, replied, "No need to be sorry." Many of the people I know have achieved results, and they were all broke. So they must have gone through that journey. It's not saying that they all became millionaires. I get his circle. It just means that these are the conditions.
There's something called big hermitage and small hermitage. Big hermitage is when you do it in the world. Like when someone asked, you don't want to leave here and hide in a cave. You're ready to do it while you're still existing in society. Big hermitage is when you do it in the world. So, like when a person asked the question, you don't want to leave here and hide in a cave. You're ready to do it while you're still existing in society. You need a controlled kind of foolishness and the ability to earn an amount of money that will last you for a long time.
Why do you need them? Explain. So what's the point of having that money when you've already gone through the controlled foolishness?
Why don't you try it now?
Why? So why would you even need them?
Try it now. Get rid of money. Let's say you're some kind of philosopher. I don't know.
Wait, but what will the request be? A person, if he has controlled stupidity already at this level, 90% of what an ordinary person needs, he does not need in principle. He doesn't need any phones. He won't run around waiting for a new iPhone that costs 150,000, you understand. That's everything. But why does he need all of this? Explain. What's the point for him in developing himself as a person, as a warrior? You need this consumption. What will it be needed for?
So you think you're contrasting things. You believe that if you gain all these opportunities, you'll just automatically leave here.
No, I think you'll just have different accents. Maybe you'll keep reading books there. I'm sure you'll be reading books. You'll need some kind of experience. Let me give you a simple example.
Look, if this force needs you to move from the city you live into another city, right? Who will it turn to faster? To you, for example. I'm not saying it's you, but to an abstract person who doesn't have money to move, right? Or to someone who has money to move.
It will turn to someone who has personal power. And if you have that personal power, you'll move one way or another.
What is personal power? What is?
He has willpower. Here's person. You have willpower. Walk.
You have a will. What are you going to walk?
Let's talk about how many principles you can earn to be able to fly or move from one point to another.
Or you need to solve the issue quickly. She should choose someone who knows how to interact with her without spending too much, like not teleporting you, because that's already a billionaire in the world of magic, right? You can teleport. This is really a level of skills that you still have to reach. You're a beginner. We're talking about regular people. These are really developments of such a level that you still have to reach. You're a beginner. We're talking about ordinary people.
Yeah, so be it. Like you said, a person is open to the spirit. They step onto the road, raise their hand, and boom, a bus or something just happens to stop right next to them. And they hop on and go.
That's all fine, but I'll say it again. The more resources and power you have, the more that power shows up everywhere, at all levels. So on a material level, yeah, you can always be like you. Described, just raise your hand and someone gives you a free ride. That's also, by the way, a certain level of surrounding power.
Of course, that's why I'm telling you.
That's already a level where you don't need anything. I know people like that too. I recently heard about someone in China, a guy that all the world leaders go to with their questions because he's connected. And everything he needs, he gets just like that. He doesn't have to work. And everything he needs, he gets just like that. He doesn't have to work. But to reach that level, you first need to learn how to serve. And the best training for serving is work. And work itself speaks volumes. If you have a lot of money, it's an indicator of your adequacy in this service, like a past exam, and that's reflected in the amount of money you have in your account. If you serve people poorly, you'll have little money. If you do well, you'll have a lot, and that's the test.
If you didn't pass it. Well, here you go again. That's another point. You have a lot of money, and that's just a fact. You attract people's attention. So you have staff that helps you. You have a team that you're responsible for. So you're going to waste your attention trying to maintain that level, not just for yourself, but for the whole team or those people who envy you.
Have you heard about this thing called delegating?
Of course, that's exactly the point. But where does the responsibility go? You're just the head of the company, a shareholder, you're the boss. And still, they'll all be sneakier.
The recall director, the operations director, the board of directors, you're the founder. You basically show up there once every 6 months if you feel like it.
Bill Gates didn't become Bill Gates right away, right? He had to go through all those stages. And only when he turned 70 or whatever did he really become Gates.
At the very least, everyone should aim to become a Bill Gates. It all depends on what people want to play with. But again, it's cool to be powerful on all levels. So, if you're all spiritual and ready to do nothing for anyone, who the hell needs you? You'll move into a second level of awareness. I'll read your tarot cards. You'll be walking around telling everyone, please, give me something to do for me. I don't know. I'll lay out tarot cards for you in this second level of awareness.
Interacting with people definitely gives you experience. If you're talking about management, then you're managing people.
For some people, your personal power is growing. That's exactly where it grows. Imagine you've learned to benefit many. Think about the personal power needed for that. Yeah, and the attention needed to maintain it. Can you imagine how much personal power you need to gather for that?
Yeah, and how much attention do you need to keep all of that going?
Attention really works the most on optimizing the process. To get richer, you don't need to deceive more people. You need to serve people more, even if it's tough. And to do that, you need to optimize everything. Learn to do things in a way that takes you less time.
I think I'll need to ask a question later. Not a question, but a topic for the podcast, so you can break down who among the current successful people fits the concept of a warrior. Who do you think could be considered one, from those we know, right?
Who among the famous people can't be considered a warrior, in my opinion, just because they're famous?
Well, millionaires and others, maybe you can just say.
They're all, those people who are already impossible or really hard to pull onto the path of strength, onto the path of knowledge, because they're so caught up in all this self-importance, this inflated ego. That's it. So the task is difficult. You shouldn't tell yourself the moral that you're cool, on the one hand. On the other hand, you need to learn how to make a lot of money. And if you can't, then you just can't, that's it. So, roughly speaking, if you don't have money, it means you haven't passed that level, that's it. What's your second option? You could go to a monastery. You think they'll just let you meditate all day there? No, they'll hand you a broom and tell you, it's work, because those smart folks who also want to sit and meditate are sitting in the center of that monastery, and they're like little vampires, sucking in a bunch of slaves who just serve them mindlessly. They all promise that someday they'll give you initiation, and maybe you'll be able to take up place.
There's a hierarchy there, again. The same hierarchy that says you first take a broom, sweep with the broom, and then maybe someday you'll get to the point where you can sit.
What's the point of this? What do you think?
There's no hierarchy, but it's inherent to humans. There's hierarchy everywhere, in any society.
No, well, it's not just like that. It's not just human nature. No, it's not just like that. It's all because at some point, someone sitting in the center has to get their food on time, and someone has to clean up after them. In fact, a dominant male never survives in nature. If you read some books, you'll find that in no tribe has a leader ever been a dominant one. That's really a notion from the last century. Scientific discoveries show that the dominant male may reproduce, but doesn't lead the hierarchy. In tribes, even among monkeys or humans, the leader has two key qualities: negotiation skills and a desire to serve others. He might get food, okay, but if we're talking about tribes, even of monkeys, for example, or about humans, of which there are few left now, where hierarchies are actually organized, then the leader, the chief of the tribe, is a person with two key qualities. The first is the ability to negotiate, and the second is the desire to serve everyone else. That's it. So if someone is doing that, they quickly become the chief of the tribe.
You're taking a person. In the animal world, it's not like that. Those monkeys. Let's take a look. They have specific hierarchies.
In the animal world, the monkey that is the dominant alpha, the one that tries to push everyone around. Right. Sooner or later she gets a beating from all the little silicon. If, God forbid, she messes with the monkey that serves everyone, then all those little ones who are being served by that small monkey will gang up on her. I'm telling you for sure, just read it. It's really interesting information. I can send you a book later. It doesn't all look like that.
I think that this question will raise so many additional questions in the discussion forum. Oh, because people need to develop right.
So, if someone wants to fit into the social world, first, you better learn how to serve properly before you gain any power. That's a normal way. There's a dark way. Dark, he's different. The dark way is you can go right now and find some monastery or start deceiving people to get money from them to take care of your body, without which you won't be able to do anything anyway. Or you could go to the streets and become some kind of drifter, just spouting nonsense and so on. Like, you're a drifter, you don't need anything. Honestly, I haven't met a single powerful person who's a drifter. He can be a drifter. By letting go of his own stuff, he can take on any role. But that doesn't mean he'll be 100% in it for his whole life. What the hell is that for?
Of course he'll change.
Power will never reach out to him because sometimes it needs to turn something over here, adjust a screw there, get into the government, do something, and then get out of the government. Also, besides all this, there are other civilizations that I don't even want to talk about right now because it's a totally crazy topic.
Alright, let's keep going. That's a tough question. I don't know if he got an answer. Alex, come on.
Last question.
Look, this topic on the forum where one guy kept saying in nearly every post, and I considered banning him, realized it wasn't right, left it. He was asking, I'm looking for a shaman, I'm looking for a shaman, and he repeated that repeatedly. The question arose, does this even make sense? Is it a manifestation or just the guy's intention? He was asking, I'm looking for a shaman, I'm looking for a shaman, and he repeated that a bunch of times under every post. And then the question came up, does this even make sense? Is it a manifestation or just the guy's intention? Does it work that way if he's constantly putting it out there that he's looking for a coach, a teacher, a shaman, or not? And this question is kind of related to that too. Does it work that way? If he's constantly putting it out there that he's looking for a coach, a teacher, a shaman, or not? So this question is kind of related to that too. Do you take on students or not? Do you take on students? Under what conditions? And where should they reach out?
No, I don't take any students. I don't need any.
I asked that question more than there was an answer.
If a person somehow brings power to me and says, well, pass on some of your knowledge to him, well, okay. I don't consider myself some kind of person with the right to lead someone along some path. So I can only share what helped me, what led me to some great results. The story of Castaneda's warrior's path helped me. I went from sitting on the floor, drinking and falling apart mentally, to running businesses and traveling the world. This journey has been amazing, and maintaining focus with insights from Carlos Castaneda's books has helped. I always kept the spirit in mind, which is why I'm here on this podcast. While building a social foundation, I keep the spiritual aspect in mind. This podcast helps me focus on it. Because while I'm working on building this foundation in the social world, so to speak, and I haven't wrapped everything up in a final, perfect state yet, I still keep the spiritual aspect in mind. I do certain things that keep my focus on the spirit. This podcast with you really helps me personally because it keeps me thinking about it in the moment. That's why I don't take on any students. I don't have those goals. Here is our podcast with you. It helps me personally so much in this that I constantly think about it at this moment. That's why I don't take on any students. I don't have those goals. As I said, my only goal, guys, is to help this channel gather resources faster so we can make films based on Carlos Castaneda's books. I think it's way cooler than our podcast because, well, it's, let's say, without any distortions. Here, I'm still coming from my own perspective. Yara and Sohan. We don't see ourselves. I don't know about Yara, but I don't consider myself some kind of guru with amazing knowledge. Nevertheless, conversations about this can really spark something for many of you. And it will be beneficial for you too, why not? And when the new episodes based on Carlos Castaneda's book start coming out, that's going to be really awesome, I think. Everything has already been said there. If you're really interested in this path, just read the books in the loop.
Then watch the movies that will be made. I'm really glad to see all of you. If we didn't answer some questions right now, maybe we'll just get to them in the next podcast. Because we're wrapping things up here. Let's try to cover everything. Thank you all. Take care.
Damn, just go for it.
Listen, I'm stuck here. Wow, the special effects